Hello, I'm Mary Lou Willits from the Middletown Springs Historical Society. Today we're talking with David Wright, Society President, about the Montvert Hotel and the Mineral Springs. David, where exactly were the Montvert Hotel and Mineral Springs located?
The springs are located in the village along the Poultney River, just off of Burdock Avenue and South Street, just up the river from this concrete bridge where South Street crosses the Poultney River.
I understand that the springs were lost and then rediscovered. Can you talk about that and also the role that A.W. Gray's business played in this whole story?
The springs were discovered by, as the story goes, by A.W. Gray, who was surveying his land or checking out his land after a flood in 1868 on the Poultney River. Now, there had been a massive flood in 1811 that had covered the springs. So the springs were still known to have existed, but they weren't evident in 1868 when this other flood came along. A.W. Gray was checking out his land after this flood, and he noticed the springs, and as the story goes, he tasted the water and was nauseated by it, by the taste of the water, or the water itself, and that convinced him that it was probably medicinal water, that it was the same water that had been lost in 1811. Various people tried the water as the rumor got around that these were the healing springs, so the story goes. And the first documented cure was somebody who had poison ivy and bathed the poison ivy affected skin with the water, and it almost immediately healed. Then other people tried it for other things. Local doctors began to recommend it to the patients to try for various things. Some of them are serious things like cancer and tuberculosis and various other diseases. And there was some success noted, and of course the successful things got reported probably, and the failures were neglected. So it turned out to be a generally favorable response. It was picked up by the Grays and their associates who wanted to develop the springs and sell the water. It was sold in specially made bottles that were modeled after the bottles that were used in the Saratoga Springs. And they must have gotten some help from the companies that bottled water at Saratoga. And the spring water fad was spreading across the area. At one time there were 13 different mineral springs being bottled in Vermont. The Montvert Hotel was built in 1870 and opened in 1871 to much fanfare. We don't know who the builder was or who designed it, but it was owned by this local partnership. And it was some of the same people who had sponsored the development of the mineral springs when they were discovered just a few years earlier. The Grays and the Clarks, who financed the construction of the building to the tune of $100,000, which was an immense amount of money in those days.
What was the guest experience like at the Montvert Hotel?
The Montvert was elegant in a low-key Vermont way, with outdoor activities including bathhouses, swimming, golf, and tennis. It was a huge hotel. It was 4.5 stories high with a full basement and a broad stairway that took you to the upper floors. The grounds of the Montvert were a park-like setting with broad paths and gardens, tennis courts, and eventually even a golf course. A path led down to the mineral springs, and you crossed the Poultney River on a footbridge. And in the park was the ornate spring house, which has been recreated in recent years on the original foundations. There was also a bottling plant for bottling the water, and there were 2 different bathhouses for men and women where you could have an elaborate kind of mineral spring water bath under the direction of a European spa director in the later years. Also down at the Mineral Springs Park was the bowling alley of the hotel. It was built in 1882. It had 2 bowling lanes in it, and it was a long, skinny building, about 90 feet long and 20 feet wide. It sat on a stone foundation, a rather crude stone foundation that's still there on the grounds. The Montvert Hotel property was originally put together from other parcels at the time the hotel was built, totaled about 25 acres, including the 2 or 3 acres on the north side of the Poultney River. On the south side, the acreage included the hillside where there was a small reservoir for water for the hotel, high above the height of the hotel, so that they had gravity pressure to run the water into the hotel. And the hotel had running water up onto the upper floors. It had very basic indoor plumbing. There was apparently a sink in each guest room, but they didn't have flush toilets. They had essentially a system of outhouses. The hotel had a gas lighting system that was supplied by an acetylene gas system that was located in a little house behind the hotel, far enough away from the hotel that if it somehow caught fire and exploded, it wouldn't do as much damage as if it were attached to the hotel itself or cause a serious fire. And there were signs that were warning people to turn the gas off when they left the room for fear of an explosion if gas were allowed to collect, if the flame were burned out or blown out and the room filled with gas, there could be an explosion and a fire that would be very dangerous. Most people weren't used to dealing with gas because they were country people. There was gas lighting in the cities, but not out in the country. This was the first gas lighting in Middletown Springs. There were carriage roads and paths on the Montvert side of the river, one of which went to the east to a pond that was fed from the Poultney River, apparently, where they made ice in the winter. And so they had an ice house there on the property near the hotel, but they cut the ice at this ice pond, and that ice pond doubled as a swimming hole in the summer months. Still visible on the property are many very old maple trees that were planted at the time of the hotel. And you can see in the early photographs of the hotel that there were just some saplings that had been planted around the hotel building because it had been built in what it looks like a pasture. There was a long straight road that came up from South Street, and that is what is now Montvert Road. And when it got to the hotel, through a double row of maple trees, which you might call an allée, going up to the front entrance of the hotel. But at a certain point, the carriage road diverged to the left and the right, and the straight line became just a walking path to the hotel entrance. And halfway between that divergence and the hotel was a circular fountain base and a fountain that looks like it was made out of rough stone. And it was water that was pressurized once again from the reservoir up on the hill behind the hotel. The hotel was an immense building. It was 100 feet long and 100 feet wide. It was L-shaped, so that those 2 wings of the hotel were 100 feet long and then probably more like 30 or 40 feet wide. And the inside of the L was the rear service entrance where there were where supplies were brought in. Up on the hill behind the hotel was a dormitory for the workers. It looks like it was a two-story building. There's no sign of it today, but photographs show a two-story building with many windows and doors at either end. Just inside the tall doorways of the entrance to the hotel was a lobby area with a registration desk and a stairway that went up to the upper floors, a grand stairway. Then off of that hallway on the ground floor were at least two different parlors where people could sit in comfortable upholstered furniture or sit at card tables and play games. And it was probably an area where people socialized in the evening, also waited for the call to dinner when they collected for the lunch and the evening meal. The dining room seated 150 and again had high ceilings and had a little balcony where a string trio would play during the meals, as we were told in the advertising for the hotel. It had beautiful china and nice silverware and chandeliers that were supplied with this acetylene gas that was produced in the gas house on the property.
I was just thinking that from 1870 to 1900 in America, it was a period of tremendous amount of change and innovation. How did the Montvert Hotel keep up with the times?
Well, it was a period of rapid change, and people's expectations about travel and hotel accommodations changed a lot in that period too. By 1875, business related to the Springs and the Montvert Hotel was strong enough to have persuaded the townspeople to change the name of the town from Middletown to Middletown Springs. But in the late 1870s, business waned to the point where the hotel was closed for a year in 1878. The property was sold to a New York hotel company that operated the Hanover Hotel in New York. It probably was a way that hotel could extend its business in the summertime to a place that was outside the city, away from the heat and disease and so forth that was more common in the city in the summer. And the means of getting there was in place. The railroads, the ferry boats up the Hudson River, and the train that actually went all the way to Poultney. So it was apparently considered a good investment for them, and they bought it. But they had limited success too, and the hotel ownership ended around the turn of the 20th century, and the Gray family actually bought the property back from the New York investors and had the building demolished a few years later. They couldn't see running it anymore. It probably needed repairs and upgrades and so forth after 30, 35 years. So that's why the building was demolished. And it's worth noting that when the Montvert Hotel building was torn down, that the materials were taken to Poultney, and a lot of it was used to build houses. And there are at least 24 houses over there today, to this day, that are visible, that were built from the remnants of the hotel by a builder named Mr. Town, T-O-W-N-E, who lived in Poultney and did a lot of interesting work around Poultney. He was involved with moving the bowling alley
up onto the lawn of the hotel and turning it into a bungalow-style house for Brainerd Avery's parents, who were living in St. Albans, Vermont at the time.
In 1970, the Historical Society built a reproduction of the original spring house on the original marble foundations, where the springs continued to flow through the original piping system. So today, visitors experience an ornate Victorian spring house, just like the one the visitors to the Montvert experienced 150 years ago.